Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for being here today. Welcome to this session on using distance education as a driver for internationalization. My name is Maria Sarabia, and I work as an internationalization officer at UNED, Spain's National Distance Education University. It is a pleasure to be with you today. Many of you already work in institutions with established internationalization strategies and substantial experience in mobility, partnerships, projects, and quality-related processes. For that reason, this session is not designed to explain internationalization from the beginning, but to explore how distance education can strengthen and expand the strategies your institutions already have in place. Over the next 40 minutes, this session offers a general framework for understanding the relationship between internationalization and distance education, including some conceptual issues, institutional implications, benefits, and key quality considerations. It is intended as a useful starting point for the more practical parts of the training that follow. Distance education has fundamentally changed how higher education institutions think about being international. Universities today are expected to be globally connected, socially inclusive, and technologically capable at the same time. This creates an important opportunity. Distance learning not only helps institutions reach new audiences, but also offers new ways to improve the quality and scope of internationalization. It can reduce barriers, build bridges, and sustain academic collaboration across borders, even when physical mobility is limited. This matters because distance education changes the geography of higher education. It allows institutions to connect learners, teachers, researchers, and partners internationally in ways that do not depend only on travel. In that sense, it opens the door to more continuous, inclusive, and adaptable forms of international engagement. So, let us begin with a basic question. What do we mean by internationalization in higher education? Internationalization is a deliberate process of integrating international, intercultural, and global dimensions into the core missions of the university: teaching, research, and service to society. It is important to stress the word deliberate. Internationalization does not happen by accident. It requires institutional choices about priorities, resources, partnerships, and the kind of learning environment a university wants to create. It is also important to remember that internationalization is not an end in itself. It is a means to improve quality and relevance in a globalized world. It is not only about prestige or rankings. At its best, it helps institutions prepare students and staff to work across cultures, collaborate across borders, and respond to complex global challenges. In other words, globalization may create the pressure, but internationalization is the institutional response. This brings us to a second key idea. Internationalization is not only about content, isolated activities, external visibility, or mobility numbers. It is also about how the institution is organized. In other words, internationalization is closely linked to governance, priorities, procedures, incentives, partnerships, and coordination across the university. This is especially important when we talk about distance education. Distance education should not be understood only as a delivery model, or simply as the use of technology. It is a strategic institutional choice about how teaching, student support, and international engagement are designed and organized. That is why, when institutions use distance education for internationalization, they are not just adding digital tools to existing practices. They are rethinking how international activity is structured, how it is supported, and how it can be sustained over time. This also means that the conversation cannot be only pedagogical. Of course, pedagogy matters, but so do organization, leadership, coordination, and institutional commitment. If these elements are weak, internationalization through distance education may remain fragmented or symbolic. If they are strong, however, distance education can help the institution move towards a more connected, more inclusive, and more strategic model of international engagement. So the key message here is simple. Integrating distance education is not a purely technical decision. It is an institutional decision, and it has consequences for how the university works. At this point, it is useful to distinguish between two well-established expressions of internationalization: internationalization at home and internationalization abroad. Internationalization at home focuses on integrating international and intercultural dimensions into the learning experience of all students, including those who never travel. Internationalization abroad traditionally refers to mobility, partnerships, joint programs, and other cross-border activities involving physical or organizational presence in different countries. Distance education interacts with both of these dimensions. It can strengthen internationalization at home by embedding international and intercultural learning into regular teaching. At the same time, it can complement internationalization abroad by supporting virtual collaboration, blended mobility, and ongoing partnership work across borders. In recent years, some authors have also referred to internationalization at a distance as a useful way to describe the growing role of digital and virtual formats in international engagement. Whether that expression is used or not, the main point remains simple. Distance education helps connect internationalization, cooperation, and inclusion in more practical and sustainable ways. Now let's clarify what we mean by distance education in this training. In simple terms, distance education is a way of organizing teaching and learning where teachers and students are not in the same place, and often not in the same time. Most of the time, interaction, support, and assessment are mediated by technology, but not always. What really defines distance education is that communication and learning are structured to happen across distance, whether that is through digital platforms, blended formats, or other forms of mediated interaction. Just as important is what distance education is not. It is not simply uploading materials and hoping that students will learn on their own. When it works well, distance education means designing rich learning environments that invite participation, offer timely feedback, and create real interaction among people in different locations. This is exactly why distance education connects so well with internationalization. Both are about crossing borders, geographic, cultural, institutional, and social. If we design distance education carefully, we are not simply sending information to remote learners. We are creating spaces where people from different contexts can meet, exchange ideas, question assumptions, and build understanding. At institutional level, this means that distance education is more than a delivery mode. It becomes a strategic way of shaping how the university connects people, knowledge, cultures, and partner institutions. Done well, it improves the quality and variety of what we offer and creates long-term benefits for students, academics, and the institution as a whole. And this is why distance education matters so much for our discussion. It multiplies the ways in which universities can engage internationally, reduces dependence on physical mobility alone, and opens more flexible routes for participation and cooperation. It does not replace the value of travel or face-to-face exchange, but it makes internationalization more continuous, more widely shared across the institution, and more closely aligned with inclusion and educational quality. At the same time, distance education should not be reduced to technology alone. Technology matters, but the real issue is not the platform itself. The real issue is what institutions do with it. Distance education becomes meaningful for internationalization when digital environments are used intentionally to create collaboration, intercultural learning, access, continuity, and stronger academic connections. Without that intentional design, online provision may expand delivery, but not necessarily internationalization in any meaningful sense. So the strategic question is not simply whether a university uses digital tools. It is whether those tools are helping the institution become more international in ways that are academically sound, inclusive, and sustainable. This is why distance education should be understood as a strategic opportunity. It allows universities to rethink how they reach learners, how they cooperate with partners, how they organize international experiences, and how they connect internationalization with their broader public mission. Used well, distance education can support not only expansion, but also transformation. It can help institutions internationalize teaching and learning more deeply, involve a wider academic community, and create forms of cooperation that are less dependent on travel and more resilient over time. To understand how this works in practice, it is necessary to look beyond isolated initiatives and consider the institution as a whole. At this point, I would like to add a dimension that is especially important for our discussion: university cooperation for development. When we talk about internationalization, we often think first of mobility, recruitment, visibility, alliances, and competitiveness. These elements are real and relevant, but there is another lens we need to keep in mind: the university's public mission, and its contribution to more equitable and sustainable societies. Seen from this perspective, cooperation for development is not something separate from internationalization. It gives internationalization a clearer social purpose. It reminds us that international engagement is not only about the position of the institution or its external image. It is also about solidarity, shared responsibility, knowledge exchange, and capacity building in the service of broader social goals. This is where the 2030 Agenda becomes particularly relevant. UNESCO underlines that education is central to the Sustainable Development Goals, and that SDG 4 is specifically dedicated to inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning for all. At the same time, UNESCO's work on higher education and the SDGs stresses that universities are key actors in social transformation and are called to advance the 2030 Agenda under the principle of leaving no one behind. If universities are called to contribute to more just, equitable, and sustainable societies, then internationalization cannot be framed only in terms of prestige or competition. It must also be linked to inclusion, sustainability, and the public good. UNESCO's background work for the World Higher Education Conference also emphasizes that the complexity of the SDGs requires new alliances, stronger collaboration, and broader forms of partnership between higher education institutions, governments, communities, and civil society. It encourages universities to connect students with real-world challenges, to strengthen their role in education, research, outreach, and community engagement, and to build international partnerships explicitly aligned with the 2030 Agenda. This creates a very important bridge to our theme. Distance education can support exactly this kind of cooperation. It can widen access, sustain collaboration across borders, and connect internationalization with forms of cooperation that are not only visible, but also socially meaningful and aligned with the university's public mission. Up to this point, internationalization has been presented as a strategic and pedagogical issue. But to make that potential real, it also needs to be seen as an institutional one. Internationalization is not the responsibility of one office alone. It moves across the whole university. On the academic side, it affects curriculum design, teaching, research, networks, and academic cooperation. On the administrative and technical side, it affects admissions, student services, procedures, communication, digital systems, and the practical support that makes international activity actually work. This is especially important in distance education, because online and blended internationalization depends on many parts of the institution working in a coordinated way. It is not only about teachers, and it is not only about international offices. It is about the institution as a connected system. And once internationalization is viewed across the institution, one issue becomes unavoidable. Quality becomes unavoidable because distance education can expand international activity very quickly. But scale on its own does not guarantee educational value. If distance education is going to act as a real driver of internationalization, quality cannot be treated as a final check or a bureaucratic formality. It has to shape the design from the very beginning. In practice, this means asking some very concrete questions. Are programs really designed for meaningful international and intercultural learning, or are they simply being delivered online to a larger audience? Are students properly supported across languages, time zones, and very different personal circumstances? Are assessment, feedback, and recognition processes clear and trustworthy when they cross borders? This is why quality in international distance education is not only about technical efficiency, it is about educational coherence. The digital dimension, the international dimension, and the student experience all need to work together in a way that is academically sound and institutionally reliable. Here, the idea of a quality culture becomes especially important. Leadership, academics, professional staff, and support services all need to share responsibility for continuous improvement, because weaknesses in one part of the system quickly affect the whole student experience. It is also helpful to distinguish between internal and external quality assurance. Internal QA helps institutions monitor program design, student support, assessment, information, and improvement processes. External QA, including accreditation and external review, helps provide legitimacy, comparability, and trust beyond the institution itself. The European Standards and Guidelines, or ESG, offer a useful reference point here. For universities working on distance-based internationalization, they are particularly relevant for program design, student-centered learning, assessment, transparent information, and continuous enhancement. So the key message is clear. Quality is what turns digital international activity into credible international education. And with that in mind, we can now move on to some of the concrete benefits, starting with the institution itself. From an institutional perspective, one of the clearest benefits of distance education is expanded reach. It allows universities to engage learners beyond the limits of the physical campus, and to create classrooms that are geographically and culturally more diverse. By designing fully online or blended programs, institutions can bring together students from different countries in the same learning environment. This helps make internationalization part of normal academic life, rather than an exceptional experience for a small group. This wider reach can also strengthen institutional visibility, partnership capacity, and participation in international networks and cooperation schemes that increasingly value digital and blended collaboration. In that sense, distance education does not only support teaching, it can also reinforce the university's international profile in strategic terms. Another important institutional benefit is resilience. Internationalization strategies based only on mobility can be fragile when travel is disrupted, budgets are tight, or face-to-face cooperation becomes difficult. Distance education provides alternative ways to sustain joint activity through virtual exchange, online courses, and collaborative projects. So the point is not that distance education replaces mobility. The point is that it diversifies institutional capacity and makes internationalization more sustainable over time. For students, one of the main advantages of distance education is that international learning can become part of ordinary academic life, rather than a rare opportunity linked only to travel. Students can work with peers in other countries, compare different social and professional contexts, and learn to communicate across cultures in digitally mediated environments. This is especially valuable because it reflects the way many people already study and work internationally today. It also creates more realistic opportunities for students who are often left out of physical mobility schemes. For example, students with jobs, care responsibilities, financial constraints, disabilities, or visa limitations. For them, distance education may be not just convenient, but the only viable route to an international learning experience. When these activities are well designed, students do not only gain exposure to diversity, they develop specific competences: online teamwork, intercultural communication, collaborative problem-solving, and the ability to participate confidently in international academic settings. So the value is not only greater access, but also better preparation for study, work, and citizenship in a connected world. Distance education also creates important opportunities for academics and professional staff. For academics, it opens new ways of collaborating internationally through joint modules, virtual seminars, shared case studies, micro-credentials, and research teaching initiatives developed with partner institutions. One important advantage is that these activities can often be integrated into regular academic life. They do not always require long stays abroad, and they can help embed international cooperation into everyday teaching and program development, rather than treating it as an occasional extra. Administrative and support staff also benefit, because international distance provision requires stronger capacities in admissions, advising, digital support, coordination, legal procedures, and cross-border quality processes. In that sense, distance education does not only internationalize programs, it also helps internationalize institutional practice. So everyone grows through this process: academics, professional staff, and the institution as a whole. This leads to a broader point. Distance education can make internationalization more inclusive and more closely aligned with the public mission of higher education. Virtual mobility, online joint courses, and flexible digital formats can extend international opportunities to students who have traditionally been underrepresented in these experiences. This includes students from rural areas, students with disabilities, those facing financial hardship, and learners with work or family responsibilities. In these cases, distance education is not only a technical alternative, it is a strategic way of reducing barriers and widening participation. That is why distance education can help universities connect their international agendas with equity, diversity, and social responsibility. It supports a move away from an elite model of internationalization toward a more democratic one, where international learning becomes possible for many more students. At the same time, none of this happens automatically. which is why the challenges also need to be addressed honestly. If distance education is to function as a driver of internationalization, institutions need to address several pedagogical and quality challenges in a deliberate way. The first is quality assurance itself. Online international provision needs robust frameworks that protect academic standards, support reliable assessment, and ensure that learning outcomes remain credible across contexts. A second challenge is student support and retention. International distance students may face isolation, time management difficulties, uneven digital access, or a weak sense of belonging, so advising, peer interaction, and timely academic support become essential rather than optional. A third issue is teacher readiness. Many academics are still not fully prepared to teach in online or blended formats, and even fewer have experience designing learning activities that intentionally foster intercultural learning in virtual environments. Finally, institutions need learning materials that are linguistically accessible, culturally sensitive, and adaptable to different educational contexts. In other words, good intentions are not enough. Pedagogy must be designed for diversity. Beyond pedagogy, universities also face organizational and regulatory challenges when they use distance education for internationalization. In many contexts, the recognition of virtual mobility, online courses, and digitally mediated collaboration is still uneven, which creates uncertainty around credit transfer, validation, and institutional legitimacy. There are also internal governance challenges. Institutions need clear policies, transparent decision-making, and effective coordination between international offices, academic departments, IT services, student support units, and quality assurance teams. Without that, even strong initiatives can remain fragmented. Another challenge relates to workload and incentives. Developing online international activities takes time and expertise, but these contributions are not always recognized in workload allocation or career progression. If institutions want faculty engagement, they need to value this work properly. Finally, universities must operate within national frameworks related to accreditation, cross-border provision, fees, data protection, and language policy. This means that internationalization through distance education is not only an academic matter, it is also a government and compliance matter. One of the most important challenges we face is achieving real institutional coherence. Distance education can only become a true driver of internationalization when the academic, administrative, and technical parts of the university are aligned and working in the same direction. This is often where implementation fails. A program may be internationally designed, but admissions procedures are not adapted. A partnership may be formally signed, but never activated in daily practice. Quality assurance may exist on paper, but not in the way courses are actually delivered and supported. So the message is simple. If these dimensions do not work together, internationalization remains fragmented. If they do, distance education can move from isolated projects to a genuine institutional strategy. Experience from many institutions shows that successful internationalization depends on alignment between academic and administrative processes. This is particularly true in distance education. Curriculum design, teaching practice, assessment, admissions, student services, legal procedures, data management, and partnership coordination all need to support one another. If one part of the system moves and the others do not, internationalization stays partial and fragile. When the institution works as a whole, distance education can become a powerful driver instead of a loose collection of initiatives. At the same time, we need to be honest about the risks that quality mechanisms must address. Internationalization can generate problems such as weak admissions control for international cohorts, misleading recruitment practices by intermediaries, uneven cross-border provision, or low-quality programs driven mainly by commercial motives. Some of these examples come from highly commercialized environments, but the wider lesson applies everywhere. As internationalization expands, institutions need reliable quality mechanisms to protect trust, academic standards, and the student experience. This warning is especially relevant for distance education, where online provision can scale very quickly. Expansion without strong safeguards can damage, rather than strengthen, the institution's reputation. That is why institutional coherence, quality, and alignment across academic, administrative, and technical areas are not optional extras. They are the conditions that allow distance education to act as a real driver of internationalization. We also need to talk directly about infrastructure and equity. Distance education can open many doors, but only if students actually have the conditions to take part. And the reality is that they do not all start from the same point. Some students have strong internet access, reliable devices, and a good study environment. Others do not. So the digital divide is still a very real barrier, and if institutions do not address it, distance education can end up reproducing inequality instead of reducing it. There is also the question of infrastructure. Universities need reliable platforms, video conferencing tools, digital support services, and systems that work well across time zones and with different student profiles. If that infrastructure is weak, international online learning becomes much harder to sustain in practice. And equity is not only about access to technology. Some students will also need adapted materials, additional support, or more flexible ways of participating and being assessed. So the main idea here is simple. If distance education is going to be a real driver of internationalization, infrastructure and equity cannot be treated as side issues. At this point, it is clear that distance education can greatly expand the scope of internationalization, but only when it is approached strategically and at the institutional level. It can widen participation, diversify international activity, strengthen resilience, and support more inclusive forms of learning and cooperation. At the same time, its value depends on quality, coordination, and real institutional commitment. Without these elements, digital expansion may remain superficial. With them, it can become a meaningful part of the university's internationalization strategy. This is important for the rest of the training. From now on, we are not only trying to understand the concept, we are going to identify practical tools, institutional gaps, and realistic actions that can help universities move from general ideas to concrete implementation. So let's close this first part with a few key messages. First, distance education should not be seen merely as a delivery mode, but as a strategic driver that can extend reach, enrich curricula, deepen collaboration, and involve a wider academic community in international activity. Second, internationalization should be inclusive, not selective. One of the great strengths of distance education is that it can bring international learning opportunities to students and staff who might otherwise remain outside these processes. Third, quality has to be designed in from the beginning, not added on at the end. If internationalization through distance education is to be credible and sustainable, it needs strong pedagogical design, institutional support, and clear quality assurance from the start. And finally, alignment across the whole institution is essential. Internationalization through distance education only works well when academic, administrative, and technical dimensions are truly connected in practice. In this sense, distance education does not replace traditional forms of internationalization. It strengthens them, broadens them, and makes them more sustainable, more democratic, and potentially more meaningful. It helps ensure that knowledge continues to flow, collaborations can keep evolving, and students can develop the international perspectives they need to succeed in an interconnected world. To close, I would like to thank you once again for your time and attention in this first part of the training. I hope it has been useful to frame what we mean by distance education as a driver of internationalization, and to give you some ideas about its strategic potential for your institutions. In the next module, we will move from this general overview to a more concrete perspective, looking at UNED as a small case study and exploring how some of these ideas are being implemented in practice. I look forward to continuing this journey with you in the following session.